There are few things more satisfying in British politics than watching a government minister get absolutely eviscerated on live television by someone who knows exactly where the bodies are buried. And when that someone is Ed Balls, former Labour Chancellor who knows every trick in the political playbook because he literally wrote half of them, and the minister is Peter Kyle desperately trying to defend broken manifesto promises while stuttering through increasingly implausible explanations, well, that's breakfast television gold. This morning on Good Morning Britain, we witnessed what can only be described as a masterclass in political interrogation, as Balls systematically dismantled Kyle's attempts to spin Labour's manifesto U-turn on workers' rights. And folks, it was brutal. Welcome to UK Political Insight, where we watch politicians squirm under proper scrutiny, and today we're breaking down how a Labour minister got absolutely destroyed by a former Labour politician, why manifesto promises apparently mean nothing anymore, and what happens when you try to gaslight people who actually read your manifesto. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well. Right, let's set the scene because context is everything here. Peter Kyle, the Business and Trade Secretary, appeared on Good Morning Britain to talk about new legislation giving fathers the right to take unpaid parental leave from their first day in a new job. Sounds good, right? Positive news, supporting families, the kind of thing you'd expect a Labour government to be proud of. Except there's a problem, a big problem. Labour's manifesto didn't just promise day one parental leave. It promised day one basic rights for parental leave, sick pay, and protection from unfair dismissal. That last one is crucial because the government has just quietly dropped it. Ed Balls, who's now a presenter on Good Morning Britain, but was once a senior Labour figure and shadow chancellor, knows a manifesto promise when he sees one. And more importantly, he knows when a government is trying to pretend they haven't broken one. So he went straight for the jugular. He said, "You're delivering today on parental leave and sick pay, but you decided to drop that promise on unfair dismissal." Simple question. Clear and direct. The kind of question that should have a simple answer if you're being honest. And this is where it gets absolutely glorious. Kyle's response was a stuttering mess that would make even the most sympathetic viewer wince. He said, "On unfair dismissal, Ed, good morning, I brought it forward by 2 years, which is what it was when the Tories left office. It's now going to become 6 months, so we've brought that forward." Now, if you're watching at home with your morning coffee, you might think, okay, that sounds reasonable. They've improved on the conservative position. Except Balls isn't having any of it because he actually read Labour's manifesto. Balls immediately called out the spin, and this is where Kyle's defense completely collapsed. Balls said, "The manifesto said you would introduce basic rights from day one, so you haven't brought it forward from 2 years to 6 months. You've gone backwards from your manifesto promise of day one to 6 months. This is the kind of devastating clarity that cuts through all the political waffle. Kyle is trying to frame going from 2 years to 6 months as progress. Balls is correctly pointing out that progress from your manifesto promise would be keeping your manifesto promise of day one. Going to 6 months isn't bringing something forward. It's breaking your promise and hoping nobody notices." Kyle, now visibly struggling, tried to pivot. He said, well, let's be really clear, Ed, because today we are laying the legislation that means people will have parental rights from day one. That will impact over 30,000 people from this April when these rights go live. This is classic political deflection. When you can't defend one broken promise, start talking loudly about a different promise you are keeping. It's like if someone accuses you of not doing your homework and you respond by showing them a different assignment you completed. Yes, you did something, but you still didn't do what you said you'd do. But Balls wasn't letting him off the hook that easily. Because here's the thing about broken manifesto promises. They don't just disappoint voters. They also disappoint the people who actually fight for these rights, trade unions specifically. And British trade unionist Sharon Graham has been absolutely scathing about Labour's betrayal on this issue. Balls brought this up, remarking, "She said you should keep your promises. She said it will damage workers' confidence and that the protections promised aren't going to be delivered." Now, this is particularly awkward for Labour because unions are supposed to be their core allies. These are the people who fund the party, who mobilize members to campaign, who are meant to be part of the Labour movement. When union leaders are publicly calling out the government for breaking promises to workers, that's not just political embarrassment. That's a fundamental betrayal of what Labour is supposed to stand for. And Kyle's response? He insisted the legislation is a big step forward and kept repeating that people who've been in work for 6 months will now have rights instead of having to wait 2 years. Which sure is technically an improvement on the conservative position, but it's not what Labour promised. It's not day one. And this is the fundamental problem with Kyle's entire defense. He's arguing that because they're better than the Tories, they should get credit. But Labour didn't run on a manifesto of "we'll be slightly better than the Conservatives." They ran on transformational change, on actually delivering for working people, on keeping their promises. When your defense is, well, we're not as bad as them, you've already lost the argument. The fact that Kyle kept stuttering and using filler words throughout this exchange tells you everything you need to know about how uncomfortable he was. Politicians are trained to handle hostile questioning. They practice their lines, they have their talking points, they know how to deflect and pivot. When someone with Kyle's experience is reduced to and on live television, it means they know they're defending the indefensible. They know they've broken a promise. They know the person questioning them knows they've broken a promise, and they're desperately trying to spin their way out of it. But here's where things got even more entertaining, because Susanna Reid, the co-host, decided to steer the discussion toward another controversial topic, the Conservatives' planned social media ban for under-16s. And she pointed out that this proposal has been supported by Andy Burnham, the Labour mayor of Greater Manchester. So Labour is now caught between their own mayor supporting a policy and presumably not wanting to agree with the Conservative opposition. Reid asked, "Are you in a pincer movement now between Kemi and Labour's Andy Burnham over a ban of social media access of children under the age of 16? Is this something this government is considering bringing in?" Kyle's response was to say they need to think very carefully about a ban, that people want safe experiences but also want to explore the benefits of social media. Standard political non-answer. But then he tried something that might have worked with a less competent interviewer. He attempted to reframe the pincer movement by bringing in Nigel Farage. He said, "You say we're in a pincer movement. Kemi Badenoch wants to ban, but we also have Nigel Farage who wants to overturn all of the legislation and make sure children are exposed to harm again. That is the pincer movement we're caught between." Now, this is actually quite clever political rhetoric if you can get away with it. Kyle is trying to shift the frame from Labour caught between their own mayor and the opposition to Labour as the sensible middle ground between Badenoch's banning and Farage's dangerous deregulation. It's a classic triangulation move. Position yourself as the reasonable moderate between two extremes. Except Reid wasn't having it. Her response was absolutely withering in its simplicity. She said, "That's not the pincer movement I'm referring to." 4 seconds of television that completely demolished Kyle's attempted deflection. This is what proper journalism looks like. When a politician tries to change the subject or reframe the question to avoid answering, you don't let them. You call it out. You bring them back to the actual question. Reid's blunt response was perfect because it showed viewers exactly what Kyle was trying to do. He was attempting to dodge a difficult question about internal Labour divisions by making it about Farage instead, and she shut that down immediately. What makes this whole exchange so significant is that it reveals multiple problems with how Labour is governing. First, they're breaking manifesto promises and hoping they can spin their way out of it. Second, they're alienating their traditional allies in the union movement. Third, they're caught between different factions within their own party on major policy issues. And fourth, when challenged on any of this, their ministers resort to stuttering, deflection, and attempted reframing rather than honest answers. The unfair dismissal issue specifically is huge because it affects millions of workers. Under the Conservative system, you had to be employed for 2 years before you had protection from unfair dismissal. Labour promised day one protection in their manifesto. They're now implementing 6 months. That means if you start a new job and get fired in month 5, you have no recourse even though Labour explicitly promised you would. That's not spin. That's not conservative talking points. That's just what happened. And Sharon Graham's criticism is devastating precisely because it comes from within the Labour movement. She's not some right-wing critic. She's someone who should be Labour's natural ally. When she says this will damage workers' confidence and that protections promised aren't going to be delivered, she's articulating the betrayal that many Labour supporters feel. The government promised one thing, delivered something less, and is now trying to pretend that's actually good enough.
Kyle's repeated insistence that going from 2 years to 6 months is a big step forward technically isn't wrong. It is an improvement on the conservative position. But Labour didn't win a landslide election by promising incremental improvements on conservative policy. They ran on transformational change, on actually delivering for working people, on keeping their promises. When your defense is, well, we're not as bad as them, you've already lost the argument. The stuttering is also interesting from a psychological perspective. Kyle knows he's defending a broken promise. He knows Balls knows it, he knows the viewers know it, but he has to defend it anyway because he's a government minister and that's his job. So he stumbles through an explanation that he doesn't really believe, using filler words because he's trying to find a way to say, "We broke our promise," without actually saying those words. It's linguistic gymnastics performed under pressure, and it's painful to watch. Ed Balls, on the other hand, is in his element because he's asking questions from a position of knowledge rather than defending the indefensible. He was in government. He knows how these decisions get made. He knows the difference between delivering on a promise and finding excuses for why you can't. And he's clearly enjoying watching Kyle squirm because there's a certain satisfaction in seeing current politicians face the same scrutiny you once faced. The social media